Welcome back to our discussion on Professor Karim and his works on...
Sir, I think we should mention some of his other works, particularly his work on Murshid Quli Khan and his stamps, which was the subject of his second PhD thesis.
Which he got from the University of London.
University of London. That was published from the Asiatic Society. And recently, not recently, a Bangla version of that book has been
translated into Bangla also.
Bangla also. That's also very significant contribution by Professor Karim.
Of course. And another thing which struck me in this particular book, that when he is discussing a coin, he has gone through all the earlier people who have read that coin, interpreted that coin, or written something about that coin. So he has gone through all of them before coming to his own conclusion about the coin. So that shows that he never left something flimsily. He had to go deep into it and find it. What do you think about that?
Yes, I agree with you. I think one of the lasting values of his work is the fact that he does give you his thread of reasoning and the evidence which he used to put together each attribution for each coin. And I have to say that that's a very valuable lesson for all of us. There is a tendency nowadays to generalize very easily, and one can understand that that helps to appeal to a broader audience. But at the same time, one has to get into the technical aspects and ascertain what are the facts. And his method was excellent at allowing you to follow the chain of evidence to the earliest find or discovery and confirm whether you agree with him or don't. I think it's a very courageous scholar that does that, but a very honest one.
Yep. And I can say one thing, that another scholar who was also couldn't come to that become famous, but still today he is recognized as one of the pioneers in the study of coins. He is N.K. Bhattashali, Nalinikanta Bhattashali, who was for a long time the curator of the Dhaka Museum. At that, Dhaka Museum was established in 1913, and Bhattashali was its curator from 1914 to 1947, where he died on the museum premises. And during this period he collected a lot of coins in the Dhaka Museum, and he can be said to be the pioneers who studied the coins that were collected in the museum. He studied them, and his book was published from Cambridge, the Coins and Chronology of the Early Independent Sultans of Bengal. And Karim was highly respectful to this man, and always used to tell us that Bhattashali's work is one of the finest work. You should go through it first before coming to any conclusion about the early independent sultans, when he was teaching us the history of Bengal in the medieval period. Now, I would ask Professor Islam that nowadays we find that medieval or ancient studies are really something of a bygone days. It's not at all of any interest to present-day scholars or students.
That's very unfortunate. That history itself, as I was telling you yesterday, history itself has lost its attraction. And that is more so in the case of ancient history and medieval history. And one of the problems in pursuing a subject in the medieval history is that you must know Arabic and at least Persian.
Yeah, and that is also the case with the ancient period. You must know
Sanskrit. And the people are not interested in learning a dead, what they consider to be a dead language like Persian or Sanskrit. That means the additional time and effort which is needed to be a student of ancient and medieval history, that is very much missing among the modern scholars, and that there is a tendency, unlike people like Professor Karim, to draw a hasty conclusion. They are not ready to wait, to take into consideration the different aspect of a particular piece of information. You get information and draw a conclusion as soon as possible. That's the tendency, unfortunately, we notice these days. And to come back to your question, the fact remains that our medieval history and ancient history is being very much neglected.
And it's a case throughout whole of India, subcontinent also. There are very few scholars nowadays working on the medieval or the ancient period. Very few. And may I ask Dr. Dale that did you have to manage to learn a little bit of Persian and Arabic?
Oh, absolutely. One can't even start looking at the field without being able to read firsthand, because you can never trust what others have written in translations or transcriptions. I remember when I first came across the coins of the Sultanate, which are, as we know, written in Arabic, whereas the Mughal coins generally used Persian, the difference being in the number of letters and the language used. When I first came across the Sultanate coins, I was quite perplexed which way to hold them up, which was up and which was down. And I was actually in Kashmir in a little rest house. And when the son of the owner looked at me and saw that I couldn't read them, he said, "This is not right." And he started teaching me every night to know the alphabet, Aleph, Be, Pe, Te, and forced me to memorize it. And he was giving me the grade 1 curriculum from the schools. And by the time I had finished under his tutoring, I was able to recite and recognize the Arabic alphabet. So that was my start. Of course, in later years, I studied formally in university, but I very fondly remember that it's really not that difficult to get started if you're serious.
Not only knowing the alphabets, you had to master the calligraphy also. In the coins,
Indeed.
They write it in such a cursive way that you have to learn the calligraphy also.
There are many different schools. Each one has its own attraction and appeal, but it's necessary to master them. Indeed.
So, being a Canadian, why did you pick up a subject of this area and also a difficult one on the coins?
My first career was in engineering, and I think what attracted me to it was problem solving. Engineers every day have to solve conundrums. And when I first came across the coins, I realized that there were more questions than answers, and especially when the coins were so hard to read. And I think bit by bit I was drawn in like a fish on a line until it became an obsession, and I started appreciating the other aspects of it that were enriched, like the histories, a knowledge of the society, of the civilization.
Yes, and I guess you still keep on with the recent writings on the coins of this area.
It's
what I
necessary.
gathered from your lecture last evening.
Absolutely. You have to keep up to date. As I said earlier, nothing stands still. And if you don't pay attention, you're left standing there alone.
Of course.
Yes.
Yes, and to say something about Professor Karim, I'm sure we have dealt with most of his works and his personality and his scholarship. And another thing is the simple way he used to live and the dedication he had always for research and writing. It puts me into such of a, what I should say, that when we were compiling the Banglapedia, and he I think contributed about 100 entries into the Banglapedia, and you know that whenever we asked, say, to write about, say, 10 topics, we used to send a letter to him. Within about 10 days or a fortnight, it will all come in his own handwritings, and a small letter would come with it. Momin, please go through the writing and see that they are correctly typed. So because his handwriting we could read, because we have seen it for a long time, and most of the typists could make mistakes. And I was amazed to find that he wrote all these Banglapedia topics within a month, within months, I should say.
Without any help of a computer.
Yeah. Because he was very proud that we are doing this, and he encouraged us to do this, and his contribution in the Banglapedia is enormous, because the entire medieval period is covered by him, and the medieval, all the towns and all the administrative posts, the different geographical units, all these things have been covered by Karim in the Banglapedia. It's amazing, and when we look at his scholarship,
referring
I'm sure
to the
that one must say that he's one of those rare species that we don't find nowadays in the scholarly world. And I think this is happening throughout the entire subcontinent. But I'm amazed that in America, nowadays they are taking very special interest in these ancient medieval studies, and in some of the universities I found that they are doing it. What is your idea about the Western scholars working on medieval and ancient?
I think in all countries there are an ebb and flow of interest in various subjects. Sometimes it's hard to tell why. The influence of a few key people can often attract people to take up a subject. Sometimes it comes down to the funding. What are the funding agencies interested in hearing at the moment? Which is always difficult to double guess, because you know how very long it takes to become adept in subjects, work your way through graduate school and get to a doctorate. It's a huge investment. It's a risky investment of time and effort on the part of students. As to whether it's greater there, I'll tell you, I was fortunate to be a visiting professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi in the earlier part of this year. And the professors were lamenting the lack of interest of the students in general, and the fact that the interest in their field seemed to be waning. But I have to tell you, when I stood before the classes and gave a presentation, they were sharp as a whip. I was pleased to see that they weren't afraid to ask questions. They were penetrating questions. They were thoughtful questions. And they didn't allow a false respect or ceremony to hold them back from getting to the truth of the matter. So I was very impressed. I think there are still youngsters who are taking an interest, who are putting an effort into it. Perhaps they're fewer, perhaps they're a little more concentrated in certain places, but I was very encouraged in general that the next generation, at least in some places, is taking an interest in these things that we hold dear.
So that's...
Professor Irfan Habib was telling me at one point of time that as far as Aligarh is concerned, medieval studies are the most popular subject in Aligarh.
I can believe it.
Yeah, that is because of the large concentration of medieval scholars in Aligarh. Yeah.
But now they have dispersed from Aligarh, and Jamia Millia in Delhi has, I think, now become a more concentrated place for medieval studies. And Irfan Habib's students have actually moved over to Jamia Millia,
Yeah.
some of them.
About Professor Karim, at one point of time, he became an administrator. He became the Vice Chancellor of Chittagong University. And in that capacity, he worked for quite some time, didn't he? Yes.
Yeah.
And I didn't like that idea that he should become the Vice Chancellor. I told him that it's a loss that you have taken up an administrative position. He said, I agree, but you see, at some point of time in your life, you feel that you need a change. Well, okay, hopefully you will not stay there for long and you will come back, which he did. And once he gave up his Vice Chancellorship, he joined Russia University, didn't he?
After some time he became the director of the other center in Chittagong, that I forgot the name. And then he became the professorial fellow
in
at the
Russia,
Institute of Bangladesh Studies in Russia.
Unfortunately, he couldn't complete his project there.
And then he went back to Chittagong and he was made a professor emeritus by the Chittagong University. So that was a due recognition to the long-standing scholarly works he have produced. And one thing that really hurts me, that whenever we used to ask anything for his opinion or for his comments, he was always ready to give some suggestions. Go through this book and you find that something. He was a storehouse of practically medieval studies, and any question on medieval history we used to refer to him. And it is with great sadness I say that we really miss him only because we can't find someone to answer our questions on medieval history. Because Tarafdar, Professor Rahman Tarafdar, who was another colleague of ours at Dhaka University.
You met him.
Yes, I did.
Who worked on the Hossein Shahi period.
Indeed.
He was also a very dedicated scholar, but unfortunately they are gone now, and we now feel really the absence.
With the death of Professor Karim and Professor Tarafdar, the entire field of medieval study
is nowadays
virtually vacant.
And Karim tried to build up some students, Saeed and others, but they really didn't come
they
up
couldn't come up
to that standard. It is with very sad that he could not really produce.
Well, that's a reflection on our weakness or our incompetence or lack of commitment.
But the main reason is the language. The people with these classical knowledge of these classical languages are very few now. Those who have it, they don't have the knack for history. And that's the reason we don't have the medieval.
For example, Said didn't do anything after his PhD degree.
Actually so. So, this is, with this sad, comment, that we do not have a medievalist like Karim and Tarafdar among us, I have to say goodbye to this program. But let me tell you one thing, and I'm sure you will